Hello and welcome. This course is focused on the basics of business communications. We are going to work from the text authored by O.C. Ferrell and his co-authors Jeffrey Hurt and Linda Ferrell. Now, O.C. Ferrell, as it happens, is one of my co-authors on my 4 textbooks, and the 4th edition of that textbook will be out later in 2020. That text is both focused on marketing principles. This book, this course, and this book that we're working from, Ferrell et al. 2019, is more broadly based on business communications. It's in its 6th edition, so they've done a good job of ironing out the bugs to this point, and we reap the benefit of all their hard work in that regard. So the book itself is based on grouping the chapters into parts, and chapters 1 through 3 make up the first part of this text, and part 1 focuses on business in a changing world. Very pertinent topic in the context of undertaking business in the midst of a global pandemic. Part 2 is all about starting and growing a business, and that covers chapters 4 and 5. In part 3 of the Ferrell et al. Text on business, we're looking at chapters 6, 7, and 8 and focused on managing for quality and competitiveness. Part 4 is all about the people advantage, and we cover chapters 9 and 10. And part 5 is about developing relationships across chapters 11 through 13. And then part 6 is all about financing the enterprise, chapters 14 to 16. For now, of course, let's start at the beginning. Part 1, chapter 1, and part 1, chapter 1 is all about the dynamics of business and economics. So in this chapter, we take a look at the dynamics of business and economics. We first introduce the nature of business and the goals, activities, and participants in the business context. Then we look at the basics of economics and apply them to the US economy. And we end the chapter with a framework for studying business. All right, so let's get going. I'm going to share the screen here. Okay, so the learning objectives for this first chapter focused on the dynamics of business and economics. We define basic concepts such as what is a business, what is a product, what is profit, essentially. We identify the main participants and activities of business and explain why studying business is important. We define economics and compare the 4 types of economic systems. Then we describe the role of supply, demand, and competition in a free enterprise system. We specify why and how the health of the economy is measured, and we trace the evolution of the American economy and discuss the role of the entrepreneur in that economy. Okay, so let's begin. What is business? Business is about providing products that satisfy customer needs, where those customers may well be industrial business customers, or they may well be end users. So we need to design our products in line what the market needs, and we need to deliver these products or whatever it is that we're offering the marketplace in a way that reaches our intended target market, and we need to do it better than the competition. All right. Now, when we ask the question of what is a product, it gets a little bit more complicated, because products can be services the same as they can be tangible goods. And more than that, every product has tangible components and intangible components. A vehicle as a tangible component, for example, has tangible wheels, engine, chassis, electronics. These are tangible elements of the product. But intangible elements of the product for a vehicle, for example, include the brand image of the vehicle, the warranty and servicing associated with the vehicle that you've just purchased. And so service augmentation is an example of how we can improve our offer to the marketplace and achieve customer satisfaction. So I've just talked about how a product can be tangible goods, such as an automobile, but I've also talked about how tangible goods include intangible service components. A product, apart from a tangible goods, such as an automobile, a product can also be a highly intangible service, such as education, or maybe dry cleaning, or a mechanical service, for example. And each of these services are indeed products. But it's important to keep in mind that each of these highly intangible services also include tangible components, like, for example, in the education service that you're experiencing right now, technological infrastructure is definitely part of this service. In the context of medical services, all the medical devices and equipment that go into what that service is are important elements of this service, this medical service. But apart from goods or services, a product can also be an idea. The pink ribbon associated with funding breast cancer solutions, for example, and supporting breast cancer research. That pink ribbon is an idea that is a product that people buy into. Similarly, a product can also be a person, Kim Kardashian, Donald Trump. You are a product, and when you graduate, you will be a product of whatever university you're graduating from. You, as a product, can also brand and strategize how you enter the job market, for example. A product can also be a destination, somewhere like Jamaica, for example, maybe Nashville, Tennessee. How about Paris, France, or maybe Australia? Okay, so what's the goal of the business? Essentially, the goal of the business is to make a profit, although there might be sideline goals, such as lifestyle, such as meeting community needs, or if it's a government operation, a government-owned operation, maybe the purpose, apart from profit, they need the profit to stay operational, but maybe the goal, apart from profit, is to provide a public service. So maybe their profit is not positive. It actually costs the government money to provide this service, such as the US Postal Service, for example. It's not necessarily about making a profit. In the general sense, however, we can recognize the importance of making a profit, and it must be earned in a responsible manner. Now, for non-profit organizations, such as a food bank, for example, profit is not their primary goal. Regardless, they still have to do a good job of marketing, management, and financing the organization to therefore provide the community service that they intend. So whatever type of business that you're involved in, you have to manage it, you have to market it, you have to bankroll it, you have to abide by whatever laws are relevant, you have to be able to flex and curb and change with the adapting marketplace. And all of what we do as business people, as astute and successful business people must be done in a socially and ethically responsible manner. Now, when we are operating a business, we have to take into account our stakeholders. First of all, we have to identify our stakeholders. So stakeholders include, for example, not only our executive leadership team, but also our customers, our employees, our shareholders, our investors, government regulators, and the broader community. So to achieve and maintain profitability, the business must produce quality products, whatever those products are constituted as. They have to operate efficiently and effectively, and they must be socially responsible and ethical in dealing with these stakeholders. So once we identify our stakeholders, we can we can work towards conducting a needs analysis for each of those stakeholders. So what do our consumers need from this organization? What do our employees need? What do our investors need? And what does the government need? Local, state, federal levels. And then what does the surrounding community need? How do we meet those needs? Are we meeting those needs? We, the business, are we meeting those stakeholder needs? To what extent? Can we do a better job? How do we improve? So now, taking a socially responsibility approach to corporate operations, so we're talking about corporate social responsibility here. Walmart gives the example of investing in solar panels at some of its stores to decrease energy use. And Walmart does a very good job of promoting this socially responsible activity. However, it doesn't necessarily compensate for the actions that Walmart has undertaken that are not good for the community. When Walmart sets up in a particular community, they are deliberately setting up for the purpose of offering everyday value at low prices. And so they use their purchasing power of large quantities to deliver those low prices. In delivering those low prices and doing such a fabulous job at delivering those low prices for the community that they've just moved into, they're probably gonna put the local mum and pop organizations out of business, because small business owners really cannot compete on price with an operation as large as Walmart. They can compete on other aspects, but they have to have the expertise to do that, which many times they do not. Okay, so for this reason, Walmart is known as a corporate predator, and some communities will even protest at Walmart coming in to their local community. So when Walmart promotes itself as being socially responsible because it's putting solar panels on a new shop to reduce energy usage, you have to look at that activity in the broader context. You have to scratch the surface and ask the questions and think critically whether or not that highlighted action is about the organization being socially responsible, or is it essentially about a promotional tool? So here, this graphic gives us an overview of the business world. In the outer area of this circle, we've got what's referred to as the macro environment. In the macro environment, there are factors that each and every business needs to consider. And these factors will impact individual businesses in varying ways. So the factors that we business owners, astute business operators, need to take into account, need to monitor, need to watch intensely, include, for example, the economy, of course, what's going on in the digital world in terms of technological innovations, what's going on in the political world in terms of laws and regulations that we must abide by, what's going on in the ethical climate, what is considered ethical in this context, and these factors or forces in the macro environment, we need to observe, watch, monitor, so that then we can flex and curb what our business is and how we operate our business to take advantage of those changing dynamics. Similarly, we at the industry level, so moving from the macro level into the industry level, we need to watch what our competition is doing. Who is our competition? Who are our competitors? Who's offering what in the same market space? And another important question there is, what market space are you operating in? Because depending on how you define your industry, depending on what market space you consider yourself to be operating in, that will identify who are your competitors. So we need to look at a broad industry definition and then identify the competitors in that industry definition. And then as astute business owners and operators, as astute and successful entrepreneurs, we need to move from a broad industry definition where mostly we will identify indirect competition, as well as a more narrow industry definition where we will identify more direct competition. Now, apart from the macro environment and the industry, moving towards the inner part of this circle, we have the operational functions of an organization. Operational functions of an organization include, for example, the management of that organization, the marketing of that organization, and the financing of that organization. Then when we move towards the inner part of this circle, we are looking at customers, employees, which are referred to as internal customers, and the owners, operators, or leadership team of this organization. Okay, so when we're talking about the function of management in an organization, we're talking about planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. So in managing the organization, we are concerned with acquiring the resources, including the human resources that we need to make this operation successful. We are concerned with developing whatever resources we've got to work with, and we are concerned with ensuring that we are using our resources to the maximum potential. In other words, effectively and efficiently. When we are looking at marketing our business, we are focused on the customers and what the customers need and how we can deliver the right product at the right time to the right place at the right price. And so we have this marketing mix, which traditionally has been discussed as the 4 Ps, but the 4 Ps arrived in the 1960s, and quite frankly, we've moved on from there. So there's more than the 4 Ps that we need to consider. So aspects like branding, distribution, logistics, sales, all of these things also need to be taken into account when we are doing a good job of marketing our business. In terms of financing, we're talking about securing funding and using that funding effectively. Now, why is it a good idea to study business? I mean, is it even possible to learn how to be an entrepreneur? Some might argue no, and the worst place to learn about business is a business school. And that's a fair argument, because the suggestion is that when you go to business school, you actually are learning about things that may not be so useful and aspects of business theory that may well impede your creativity. However, apart from those negatives, right, there are good reasons to study business. And if you ask the question of whether you can learn to be an entrepreneur, rather than assuming no, there are techniques, knowledge and skills that you can learn to help you be better in business. Things like marketing skills, even management skills, people skills. What about information technology skills and financing? Productions and operation is a distinct area that requires technical skills. And so by studying business, you can learn these skills and avoid the pitfalls that other people that maybe haven't been to business school and studied business may well fall victim to. Okay, so another reason for studying business is to help you become a more informed consumer and active member of society. So the economic foundations of business, when we consider what these elements are, we're talking about economics in terms of the resources that are distributed for the production of goods and services. We're also talking about natural resources, so minerals in the ground, for example. When we're talking about human resources, we're talking about people and the labor potential that they offer. When we're talking about financial resources, we're talking about financial funding, capital, collateral. When we're talking about intangible resources, we're talking about resources that we cannot touch and feel, but they may not even be on the balance sheet, but they are indeed valuable. Things like our brand equity or our family business reputation. So let's look at each of these in turn. So the economic systems that are involved with the business context must address three important issues. What goods and services are offered and how much of each are on offer? How will goods and services be produced? Who will produce them? And where and when and with what will these resources be produced? And how are these goods and services distributed to consumers? So there's different ways that we can achieve these goals. There are varying economic systems through which we can achieve these goals. One of them is a communist system. And in a communist system, the people of the nation own the resources. And that might sound like a good idea, but when we have observed such communist systems, we can also observe that these communist systems are involving a low standard of living, critical shortages of consumer goods, maybe even hyperinflation and corruption, and little freedom of choice for the people involved. Now, why is that the case? Well, because communist systems may well be owned by the people, but unfortunately, they are administered via a government. And when that power is concentrated in a few number of people or entities, that leaves room for corruption. And that's what we've seen with regards to communist societies. There are advantages, but there's disadvantages too. And ideally, the people own the resources and the people have the power, but that's not the way it usually plays out. Now, in contrast to a communist system, a socialist system is one where the government owns basic industries, things like electricity or utility industries, or maybe the postal service, right? And outside of those government-owned basic industries, individuals like you and me, we own the businesses in a socialist system. So a socialist system is mostly democratic and individual freedoms are indeed recognized. The advantage of a socialist system is that it enables a higher standard of living and is actually more stable than, or considered more stable than a communist arrangement. And the disadvantage, however, is that people will generally pay a higher tax, and the potential for unemployment may well be higher. Now, in contrast to both a communist and a socialist system, a capitalist system, otherwise referred to as free enterprise, is about individuals owning and operating the majority of business. So in a pure capitalist system or free market system, all economic decisions are made without government intervention. Now, some might think that the United States of America is a free market system. But when you look at the criteria that all economic decisions are made without government intervention, you will see that that's not actually the case. And so we learn that most economies are not pure of any one form, communist, socialist, capitalist. They more likely involve a mixed economy. So in the United States of America capitalist system, for example, there is the USPS that is indeed operated as a federal government agency. It is indeed a legal monopoly. So in this sense, the American system is not a pure capitalist or a free market system, because the USPS is an example of a government-owned legal monopoly. And therefore, in moving further towards a pure capitalist system, there is an argument to privatize the US Postal Service, as other previously government-owned entities have indeed been privatized. Things like electricity companies that might have been owned by the government have been deregulated, so the laws that stop any new market entrants have been abolished, therefore enabling competitors to enter the market space. All right, so now table 1.1 goes over 2 slides, and we're comparing the communist, socialist, and capitalist systems in terms of 5 elements. Those 5 elements are business ownership, competition, profits, product availability, and employment options. So now let's look at each of those in turn. With regards to business ownership, in the communist world, most businesses are owned and operated by the government. In the socialist system, the government owns and operates major industries such as postal services, such as electricity or utility companies, and beyond that, individuals own small business. In the capitalist system, individuals own and operate all businesses. With regards to competition, in the communist system, because the government owns and operates most businesses, the government controls competition and the economy, essentially. In a socialist system, because the government owns and operates major industries, their competition is restricted in those major industries, but it's encouraged in the world of small business. In the capitalist system, competition is encouraged by market forces, and government regulations may well also facilitate increased competition. In terms of profit, for the communist systems, excess income goes to the government, hence opening the door for much corruption. In the socialist system, profits earned by small businesses are decided what to do with that by those small business owners. But for the utility companies and the postal services that are owned by the government, then of course it's the government that decides what happens to any profits. In the capitalist system, because individuals operate and own all businesses, the individuals get to decide what happens with their profits. In terms of product availability and price, in the communist system, there's typically limited choice because that's what the government wants to offer. It's more expensive to offer a higher level of choice, so the government is going to go for the low option there. In terms of socialism, there is some choice, but essentially prices are determined by supply and demand. And in the capitalist system is where we have the widest choice, because it's the market forces that will determine what's on offer and what price is associated with that offer. In terms of employment options, in the communist system, most people work for the government. In the socialist system, there is more choice of career, and in the capitalist system, there is unlimited choice of career. So in the modified capitalist system, as is the case with the United States of America, the government intervenes and regulates business to some extent through laws and legislation that is passed. The Federal Trade Commission Act was created by the Federal Trade Commission, and that's to make sure that competition is fair and equitable. So sometimes the Federal Trade Commission has to interject in the marketplace. And the government also intervenes and regulates with, for example, the cost of money. So the interest rate that is available in the marketplace. So no country, not even the United States, entails pure capitalist and other systems. None of them are pure. Most of them are mixed. All of them are mixed. So that means elements from one economic system and other elements from other economic systems. When we look at communist countries such as China and Russia, for example, yes, essentially they are communist economies, but they also have some elements of capitalism, and that's for the purpose of economic growth and development. So they integrate powers of the state with the advantage of capitalism. Many large economies operate as free market enterprises, and this includes America, Canada, Australia, Japan. But many communist and social economies apply free enterprise principles, including, for example, China and Russia. And the free enterprise system, the advantage of that is allowing organizations to succeed or fail based on market forces, based on market demand. So basic individual and business rights to motivate companies or organizations towards a successful outcome. Within the free enterprise system, we're talking about business operations with the right to own property. We're talking about organizations and their right to earn profits and use them as they so choose. We're talking about individuals and businesses having the right to determine the parameters of their business operations. So in other words, what their chosen path is, where they live and locate that business, and how they deliver the goods and services to market. So we have to understand these basic terms. Demand, supply, equilibrium. What are we talking about? In terms of demand, we're talking about the number of products consumers are willing to buy in a particular market. Similarly, supply, we're talking about the number of products businesses are willing to sell in a particular marketplace at a particular price. And then the equilibrium in between is the number of products businesses are willing to supply, and where that meets the amount of products that consumers are willing to buy. So here's a graphic of that, right? So we've got the downward sloping green curve, the demand curve here. So what that green curve is telling us is that when this is about handmade rugs, this graphic, right? So when the rugs are priced at $650 a piece, there are 2 people that are willing to buy these handmade rugs. When the price drops to as low as $350 a piece, the demand increases to 6. Now, when the price is at $500 a piece, the demand is at 4 rugs, and this is where the demand meets the supply. So at this point, at this price point, we do not have excess supply and we do not have excess demand. We have equilibrium. So the forces of supply and demand, critics say, do not distribute resources equally, because forces of supply and demand prevent sellers from selling at a higher price, and it also prevents buyers who cannot afford to buy the goods at the equilibrium price from participating in the marketplace. So this is the critics of the forces of supply and demand. So regardless, we need to look at the nature of competition. And there's various forms of competition. Competition is necessary to improve the quality of the goods and services, or maybe to reduce the prices. We need competition. Competition is healthy in that regard. But there's various ways that competition plays out in the marketplace. One of them is pure competition. A pure competition situation in the marketplace is when prices are determined solely on supply and demand. And that is an ideal that doesn't necessarily take place. What's more likely in the marketplace is monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competition is when businesses have some power over their price because of the marketing that they take on. An oligopoly form of competition in the marketplace is when few businesses are selling a particular product, and because that there's a few businesses where that power is concentrated, they get to control the price. They get to say what price this product is sold at in the marketplace, because there's only a few businesses that make the offer. In contrast, we have a monopoly, and a monopoly is where one entity is the only entity in that marketplace. So when we've got a government-owned utility company, electricity company, postal service, for example, this is an example of a monopoly. And the government permits this situation because most times it's providing a public service, and profit may actually, or the goal of profit may actually interrupt the delivery of that public service. Now, of course, we need to understand that economies expand and contract. Currently, we are in a contraction phase of the economy, given the global pandemic of 2020. When we are expanding economically, the economy is growing and people are spending money. The standard of living rises, but we also might get some inflation where prices are rising. Oops. Oh yeah. Okay. So examples of hyperinflation are historic examples. Hungary in 1946, where prices were doubling every 15.5 hours, and more recently in Zimbabwe, where inflation percentage rose into the hundreds of millions, and people were walking around with wheelbarrows full of money to pay for small items. What they actually did was eliminate, to remedy the situation. What the Zimbabwe government did was actually eliminate the Zimbabwe dollar and hitch their economy to the broader economy. And so inflation rates began to increase by that government action. All right. Now, when we've got a contraction in the economy, we're talking about a slowdown of the economy. Given the coronaviruses, economies have shuttered, and this is meaning that they're laying off workers, so unemployment is rising, and we in the United States and in other countries around the world are currently acknowledged to be in a recession. And given the current high levels of unemployment, when that is combined with other factors of economic contraction that are not for the community benefit, then we're talking about a depression, as was the case in the 1930s. So let's see, are we going to recover from this recession, or are we going to move into a depression? To me, what has to happen is that the infection rates associated with the coronavirus and the COVID disease need to be under better control. Otherwise, I don't see any way that we are going to avoid moving from recession into depression. Let's see. So recessions are often characterized by increasing unemployment, and deflation occurs when rising unemployment stifles demand. So when rising unemployment is happening at the same time as demand is decreasing, which forces the prices down, then we move from recession into depression, when we've got high unemployment with deflation. So here we've got a graphic that shows the unemployment rate for the US from 1940 through to 1916. So the unemployment rate fell post-World War II in the 1940s, and then it bumped along until we got to the year 2000 and 2008, when unemployment experienced a distinct rise. From 2009 and the problems of that era began to recover, unemployment again started to decrease until 2016, when it was reasonable. What's happened since 2016? So since this graphic takes you from, for the US, July 2019 through to July 2020. In July 2019, the unemployment rate was less than 5%. Excellent. It even fell lower, down to 3.3. But look at the distinct rise from March 2020 through to April 2020, when the world economy ground to a halt, given the global pandemic that arrived unexpectedly. Then from April through to July, the unemployment rate fell. Why? Why was that the case? The economy hasn't done any better. Well, in the US, there is a limited welfare safety net. And because of that, I think people had to go back to work. They had to register with an employer. And for those lucky enough to find work, we see this unemployment rate dropping from April 2020 through July 2020. It's a matter of watch this space with regards to economic activity and whether or not the US will recover from the current recession that economists acknowledge. So whether we recover from that or whether we move in more deeply into economic mayhem and a depression, where we've got high unemployment combined with deflation. So economies expand and contract in response to changes in consumer spending, changes in the business spending, and changes in government spending. So government spending, for example, can be a fiscal stimulus for an economy in recession. So where a government is investing in major projects, building new hospitals, building new bridges and roads, for example, because this generates jobs and it generates disposable income for consumers to spend in the economy. But as we've seen in 2020, the big lesson is that economies expand and contract also with regards to public health and safety. When we measure the economy, we use, for example, gross domestic product, GDP, and GDP is about what domestically is produced. So it does not include profits from companies that are headquartered overseas or that have operations overseas. The budget deficit is also another indicator of the economic cycle, and the US budget deficit has recently grown to record levels, and partly because of government policies and defense spending. This graphic is about the US GDP from 1950 through to 2016. And the GDP in America has experienced significant growth from the 1980s through to 2008, where it dropped off and then bumped along less intensely through to 2016. So the GDP still grew in those years, but just not as big jumps. This graphic shows you the GDP percentage changes in the 4 quarters of 2016, 2017 through to 2020. And again, given the coronavirus, look at the distinct contraction in GDP. We went negative 5% in the first quarter of 2020. So how do we evaluate a nation's economy? We look at the trade balance, which is the difference between our exports and imports. We look at consumer price index, which is the changes in goods and services purchased for a typical household. We look at per capita income, which is the income level of the average American. We look at employment rates, how many working age Americans are not working. We look at inflation rates, the price increases in consumer goods and services over time, and we look at worker productivity, the amount of goods and services produced for each hour worked. Okay, let's focus in on the American economy. What are we talking about with regards to standard of living? Well, we're talking about the wealth and material comfort of the community, which is higher for some than others. So this hyperlink here will take you through to a calculator to see where you fit in terms of standard of living. The OECD is a global collective of nations that look at the developed world and the developing world. And according to OECD, the standard of living in the US is not as high as you might assume. And relative to other countries in the world, the USA is not even in the top 10. It's in it's ranked number 13 globally in terms of standard of living. So where I come from, for example, in Australia, it is a much higher standard of living than what people experience in the US. one of the culture shock aspects for me in living and working in the US. So what do we need to know in terms of the American economy? It is an open economy, so you and I are entitled to participate in this economy as we so choose, as workers, as entrepreneurs, for example, as business owners. The US is a major player in international business. Each of us that works and earns money, we pay tax as either individual income tax or as a federal tax liability, and the government obtains about $1.4 trillion in individual income tax. Not every state has individual income tax, however, and so okay, that might be higher if that was the case. From organizations, the government's total revenue is about 10.6 generated from corporate tax. So the brand General Mills is suggested to put their consumers first, and they are watching those macro environmental trends. So they understand, as a very successful and well-established brand, they understand that consumer trends indicate an increasing health consciousness amongst consumers and an increasing environmental consciousness amongst consumers. What does that mean for General Mills? Well, it means that it's probably a good idea to offer natural foods in their product lineup and organic options. Maybe it's a good idea to label GMO ingredients that are included in their products. And of course, they want to manage and monitor that consumer demand and adapt their product designs in line with what they're recognizing the shifts and changes in consumer demand. Okay. However, however, there is, if General Mills was actually interested in putting their consumers first, and if General Mills is aware that their consumers are increasingly health conscious and increasingly environmentally conscious, then why is all of their products not organic? Okay, it's great that they're adopting GMO labeling for some products, but why is the GMO labeling not applying to all products? And even more importantly, why is General Mills including GMO ingredients in their products? So it's a contradiction there. There is some contradiction there. Okay, let's look at a brief evolution of the American economy. All right, now in the early years, like most economies, the American economy was an agricultural economy. Everything that was produced at home. So we talk about that as a domestic system. So here we're talking about the years leading up to about the mid-1800s. Now, what happened after the mid-1800s, so like in the later years of the 1800s, was the Industrial Revolution arrived. And what does that mean? It means new technology arrived for businesses to put to work to improve their efficiencies in their operations. So factories combined their raw ingredients, the new machinery technology, and their human resources in such a way to achieve greater economies of scale. And Henry Ford is a distinct example in that regard, where he deliberately arranged the ingredients required for to build a car to be arranged in such a way that the machinery that was available in the day and the manpower that was available in the day, he had his workers specialize in specific tasks. He had the entire process set up as step 1, step 2, step 3, and the raw materials that were required for each of those steps were on hand at the right time. And effectively, he introduced what is now known as the assembly line. Actually, Henry Ford is known as the father of the assembly line. And so he was able to achieve greater efficiencies than what had been recognized earlier. So if you look at vehicles, the market for vehicles prior to Henry Ford's release of the T model in 1910, what was that marketplace? Well, every vehicle was custom made to the customer's requirements. It was handmade. And what Henry Ford did instead was systemize that production, and he arrived at the mass production of vehicles and was able to produce that T model at a reduced price because of the economies of scale he achieved in the production process, but even in the sales process. He's famously quoted to have said, you can have any color you like as long as it's black. Well, what's that about? Well, because black paint was cheap, and because he was buying so much of it, he got it cheaper again, and this enabled him to offer his T model at a reasonable price that the mass market could afford. Now, beyond the Industrial Revolution and the arrival of large economies of scale in factory manufacturing, for example, as we progress on in years, what happened is that manufacturing and marketing sought to focus on the customer and what the customer needs. So in other words, when Henry Ford was designing and producing his T model, it was all about the resources that he had, the machinery, the raw ingredients, the human resources that he had. So it wasn't about market needs, it was about resources and economies of scale. So that was a focus on production. Beyond the focus of production came the focus on the customer, and this arrived around about 1960, 1950, 1960, and yeah, the focus on customer needs required businesses to do market research to identify those customer needs and how to meet those customer needs. So customer satisfaction became very important. Now, as technology advanced, keeping an eye on shifting market dynamics or shifting customer needs was achieved again with an evolution of technology. So when we arrived in the 1980s, the technology, the new digital technology that arrived, enabled a service economy to be born, and innovative organizations that were predominantly intangible and service oriented that had not existed before emerged in the marketplace. Mobile payment systems, for example, is an option that we have available to us in the current marketplace. So Google Wallet is a mobile payment system that allows users to store their credit card or debit card information. And when they check out at the store, instead of pulling out that tangible card, which is a bit old school now, users can bring up their app and use the information there to pay for their product or for their purchase. There's other options that technology has enabled with regards to payment systems, of course, but that's just one example. So what's the role of the entrepreneur in this American economy? The role of the entrepreneur is to be inventive, innovative. And the free enterprise system enables the entrepreneur to enact their innovation, their innovative ideas. And technological advances also enable us to be innovative and to enact what was not maybe previously possible. Now, the case of Warby Parker is an example of a startup which looked at the glasses industry, and they recognized that there was a very high profit margin involved with this industry. What it costs to produce your glasses, and then what these glasses were being sold for, the price, sales price, big margin in between, right? So what Warby Parker did was came along, offered a direct from manufacturer to consumer option, so totally online. So this was made available, made possible through the innovation of the internet, the arrival of the internet. 1994 is when the internet arrived, and this cyberspace infrastructure enabled entrepreneurs such as the founders of Warby Parker to be manufacturing a product such as eyeglasses and then selling it online direct to consumers, so there is no intermediaries involved. What the internet did is enable disintermediation. They no longer had to deal, the manufacturer, no longer had to deal with the wholesaler or the retailer. The manufacturer could now go direct to the consumer and skip those margin suckers in between. So for each pair sold, Warby Parker decided that one of their organizational policies was to provide a pair of eyeglasses to consumers in the developing world at an affordable price. So the Warby Parker success story is from startup to 27 now retail locations and a $1 billion organizational operation. Right. So what is the role of the government in the American economy? Well, as we've said previously in this clip, the American economy is best described as modified capitalist society or economy because the government regulates industry to encourage competition and protect stakeholders, and also because laws force businesses to adhere to government standards with regards to product safety, for example, and government agencies like the US Department of Commerce or the Federal Reserve Board occasionally will intervene to regulate the economy and the cost of money specifically in order to spur growth, for example. And an important aspect of the American economy as a developed nation is the role of ethics and social responsibility in business. Business ethics are standards set by a society. And so when you move outside of the US into other international societies and cultures, the standards of business ethics may not be as high or what is expected. In the US, stakeholders demand ethical standards and socially responsible behavior. That is a an understood requirement of doing business in the United States, because reputation is considered to drive profit, and businesses need to monitor the changes and the trends in the macro environment, in societal values, in order so that they can flex and curb what it is that they're offering and how they're offering their products in the marketplace. So now we turn to the question of, can you learn business in a classroom? Absolutely. To be successful in business, you need knowledge, skills, experience, and good judgment. So part of what we're going to do in this course is deliberately work on developing our soft skills. If I asked you right now, what do you hope to learn or gain in traveling along with me throughout the semester? Do you have specific goals for this semester, for this course? What specific steps can you take today to help you reach your short-term, medium-term, or long-term goals? All right, these are some discussion questions that we will consider in class, and that is the end of Chapter 1 from Farrell et al. On the basics of business. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you again in Chapter 2.